It's high noon.
Everybody, and welcome to episode number 10 of Foul Play. That's Fantasy Overwatch League Play. As always, I am DeathBlow, and as per the usual, maybe not necessarily always, I am joined by my two co-hosts here, Asmith and the Blevins. Gentlemen, I'm sorry, I need to immediately apologize because I have violated a rule. I am joined by the Blevins and Lord Asmith.
Thank you.
And yes, I have standardized the trumpet sound effects, so you won't be hearing it at awkward times and me trying to like go back in the file to like start it from the beginning and screw it up like last week. It should be used properly and normally going forward. So, gentlemen, we are 1 week away from the close of Stage 2 of Overwatch League Season 1, and as crazy as that is to think about, we have some fantasy results and matchups to look at from last week, and we also need to look forward at the Stage 2 finale week here. Things are going to be a little different this time around. First things first, official word is in from Winston's lab. The playoffs will not count under any circumstances into your leagues, into your weekly events that you're doing. So big thank you, Winston's lab. We very much so appreciate that, as that is... everybody just needs to be playing the same amount of matches in order for them to count is basically the crux of the issue. So great to see, and we can kind of ignore who's in the playoffs or whatever's going on for your fantasy matchup. So don't have to worry about that this time around. And one thing I do want to mention here as well before I forget, as I have the last 2 weeks when I've meant to remind you all, if you listen to this podcast on the main High Noon podcast feed, so on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever you're listening to it, if it's right there side by side with the flagship show, with Around the Payload, this is the last episode that will appear there. We are going to have our own separate Foul Play podcast feed. That means
it already exists.
It does already exist. There's already been 2 episodes put onto it. So it's been around for a little bit. We've been mentioning it on the flagship show. I've been dropping the ball and forgetting to tell any Foul Play exclusive listeners that that's going to happen. One thing that does allow you guys to do is leave a review specifically for this show. It would be super helpful, especially earlier the better. If we get a huge influx of them from the flagship fans, I might not go through and read them all, but much like before, we'll read them at the end of the show and kind of give you guys... your ability to give us a shout out, but nonetheless, especially while the feed is new, we can get a little extra publicity if we get a lot of activity on it. So please do go over there, leave us a nice 5-star review or however you feel about the show. Go ahead and feel free to be honest. Maybe not too honest though. We do have feelings, guys. But
I don't have feelings.
Okay, Lord A. Smith has no feelings. It's going to be hard to remember to do that. I did write it down everywhere I need to like address you in the notes. I wrote it in to help me remember.
Much appreciated.
That's why I didn't get involved in this battle.
Yes, you haven't had to call anyone Lord yet, but you've been a Lord once. I'm sure it will happen before too long. Twice?
I was Lord twice. I think so.
I thought we'd only done it the once, but who knows?
No, well, that was like the halftime that we like barely decided.
Oh, yeah, like the the barely half bet, just to introduce it to everybody. Gotcha. Yeah. Well, let's take a look at the beginning of the show, like we always do, at how we all did this past week. So, Lord A. Smith, I'm playing your trumpets. Tell us, how'd you do this week?
Man, I did better than expected. Stage 2 has obviously been a rough spot for my fantasy teams, but I did pretty well. I went 1-1 in the expert leagues, and I'm still undefeated in one of my leagues, the league that is my own, where I'm kicking cans and doing great.
Rigged.
No offense, listeners that are there, but I lost to the Blevins here at 76 points in the old scoring system. I will make note that I played Rascal like a coward that I was.
No, you're not a coward because
you're not a coward.
No,
you did good.
You play Rascal
you went
because you're
head
throwing.
First into battle.
No, yeah. I feel like a coward because when I played him, I just lost. Because if I had played Cool Matt, I would have won my fantasy team, even in the old scoring system. But I did beat Taco's butt in the new scoring system, and I was the high scorer there. So I feel like I'm having this resurgence back into fame. I'm feeling it, guys. I'm feeling it. Stage 3 is my jam.
For the sake of your morale, my friend, I certainly hope that's correct, but we will have to wait and see. I personally hope you can make a stage 2 to stage 3 rebound intimately, but mostly for Houston's sake, not for my own. Blevins, how did you do this past week?
Yeah, I mean, I sound like a broken record here, but I went 2-0 again.
All right, well, that wraps up the Blevins segment. Okay, go ahead.
The only other thing I'll say here is that I'm now 2 games up above second place in all the leagues. Actually, I'm 2 games above in the new league and 1 game up still, I think, in an old league. But it's like no one can touch me. This actually, for what it's worth, this week might be the week I crumble in one of the leagues because
Must be going against me.
No, I don't even know who I'm going against, but I traded for Dia last week.
Such a good trade.
Just gone. And I also have Undead on that same team. So I need to start tap dancing to Yosemite Sam shooting bullets at my feet right now to try to get this roster to work.
Well,
but we'll see. We'll see.
It's safe to say those 2 players might be dragging you down. Dragging you down is how I should have worded that. I shouldn't have said the ing. So
I mean,
shame bell yourself, please.
No way. No way. I'm the old man here. I will make all the dad jokes and bad puns I want. But as for myself here this week, I had a very good week in the expert leagues. At least the other ones are the tire fire that I left them as, and we'll probably continue to leave them there. But I actually, if you count the podcast battles, which I do try to keep close attention to just for the podcast rivalry fun, I was 3-0 this week. I had victories over Croak, a brutal 949 to 520 in the podcast battles league, and then in the old scoring format, I defeated Abnerd 798 to 746. And I clearly dominated Moirai in the new scoring format by a whopping score of 914 to 904. So nothing she could have possibly done to turn that one around. It was just too big of a margin to not call it what it is, just a sheer domination. So now that I'm done lying through my teeth, GG's to everybody I played this week. A lot of close ones. We will see how things wrap up, as there's been a lot of news this week. And let's just jump right into it. The first thing on the list here, Sinatra for the San Francisco Shock is unlocked. And
Finally.
that begs the question, what do we do with Dante? What do we do with Sinatra? What's going to happen here? I don't understand. Asmith, I need you to help me figure it out. Lord Asmith.
Thank you. Address me correctly, my little subject. I really like Sinatra here. Sinatra is obviously a good, borderline great tracer, and I think even though Dante has played better, I think Sinatra playing ups the tracer skill here. But I will mention that Dante is probably the better projectile player than Baby Bay, and I there's a real possibility that Baby Bay gets benched and you see Sinatra Dante in the lineup and run maybe even a clear dive. Who knows really what they're going to do, because all we can do is kind of scratch our head, because we have seen Dante get better and we've seen Baby Bay with perks of, with like glimmers of hope and light that he may be a superstar player every once in a while. But Sinatra has that superstar mentality, and I think he is going to come in and he's going to get the playing time that he's getting paid $150K for, guys. $150K.
Mr. 150. Yeah, I agree somewhat. I don't know if Dante's necessarily going to be coming out. Look, the San Francisco Shock coaching staff months ago, granted, it could have changed, but months ago said, hey, if we're doing all right and if the players are gelling together, we're not just going to throw Super and Sinatra in just because, just to change things up. If it's working, we're not going to. And it's definitely a stretch, a very large stretch to say that it's working for the San Francisco Shock. But, picking up a win against Houston is definitely something. Picking up a map win against London, certainly not nothing. I think it's going to depend, obviously, a lot on how Sinatra is doing in scrims, and how their game plan, how they, if they build around him or if they're putting him somewhere else. I would, if I were the San Francisco Shock, I don't know if I would necessarily be like, "Oh, Dante, see you later, man. You're out of here." He's been playing very well for the past few weeks, probably in no small part due to the fact that his job is, of course, on the line here.
I mean, I don't know if I would say 9th place is considered doing well by any means.
It's doing better for sure.
Yeah, but 3 wins this stage. I mean,
they're definitely still a bottom end team, and I think that is going to give them a lot of license to be able to do essentially whatever they want. For my money, I have no idea what that will be, and I'm basically hands off of Dante, hands off of Sinatra. If I've been using Baby Bay and I'm relying on him, I'm willing to play him, but if I have a viable option, I'm going to lean that direction instead. I'm very scared of what they're going to do here, not from a, enjoying watching the San Francisco Shock, which I did for one of their matchups this week, enjoy watching them at least. But it's
a Houston game, right?
No, it was not that one. Actually, it was the other one. I may or may not have been a little frustrated during the Houston one, but nonetheless, they're clearly a team that still has a lot of work to do, and I think that that's going to force them, or not force them, but encourage them to use some of their new players as they come up. Like we said, Sinatra makes quite a bit of money, and I don't think they're paying him that much money to ride the bench, so I do expect that to be enough of a difference maker. But we did have the GM of San Francisco basically come out and say, like, we have no interest in trading Dante, like, that's our boy, we're keeping him, and he's performed more than well enough to earn his roster spot, and I would love to see them give an attempt to running Dante and Sinatra at the same time. I think there's a lot of possibility to that. I'm not sold on it being the best bet, especially after Architect gets in and everything like that that they have going on. It would definitely be a short-term solution, but for my money, I'm staying away from as many of the Shock players as I possibly can this week, just until things get figured out. Now, another team seems to unlock a little bit this week, and at the same time, they seem to lock themselves into a corner a little bit more at the exact same time. That is, of course, the Shanghai Dragons. Help is on the way. They do have video out there on their Twitter of Fearless on an airplane. There's also an indication that Ado's his visa was approved, so he would be eligible to play if he can get into LA in time for the matches this week. We're less confident Ado will make it because there's no video of him on an airplane that's headed to Los Angeles. But so Fearless is pretty certain to unlock there and be, I would have to assume, instantly become the new main tank for the Shanghai Dragons. Now, we do, on the other side of that, we've known that Dia, I believe, right, was gone and went back to China for a little bit, and now Undead is headed out as well. So
you see some of the allegations of stuff that with him, like the whole story behind that?
No, I have no
Undead?
idea.
Yes,
basically it's something out of TMZ is all I'll say. Maybe we'll talk about it on the flagship, but it has no bearing on fantasy.
I may or may not confirm he may or may not have impregnated somebody. That's all we're gonna say.
When you say it's something straight out of TMZ, I assume that means ESPN printed it. So let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and look at this from a fantasy perspective here. Now, for those of us keeping track at home, let's say Fearless and Ado, their plane gets delayed for 6 days and they don't make it. That would leave 3 tank players and 3 support players for the Shanghai Dragons to be able to field. Now, if Fearless makes it, they now have 4 tank players and 3 support players, and if Ado makes it, there's a very real chance that the Shanghai Dragons get to play a DPS player this week. Now, one of their opponents, the first one, is obviously the Houston Outlaws, who are struggling. Is there any chance? Now, I'm not going to say that they're going to win because we don't have to care about that for fantasy. We'll cover that in the flagship. But is there any chance that you would be willing to play somebody like Ado? Like, let's say we find out definitively he's going to be there. Is there any chance you're willing to start Ado? Lord Asmith, lead us off.
I'm going to say a solid no. First off, they speak Korean. The Chinese players speak Chinese, Mandarin. So bridging that language barrier that quickly would have to be amazing. I think the only chance they have is starting Undead's Unborn Child, but I don't know if that's an option. So, I mean, I'm just gonna say no. Like we've had this whole stay away from Shanghai thing for a reason, and now they're losing both of their DPS players. Even if these guys get here, I mean, they're gonna be jet lagged like crazy. And then they're going to try to play, and just I don't foresee it working out, and I just don't see any coordination happening in that meantime.
Blevins, anything to add there?
I might actually be playing Ado in one of my leagues just because I literally it's either him or Taimu, and it's old scoring format. So the short answer and the realistic answer is no. Don't touch Shanghai whatsoever, especially since it's not confirmed. If for some reason, like if I had a letter written from Winston's lab that was like, here's an Ado guarantee. If he doesn't play, we'll give you 100 points. I'd probably play him.
But that would be awesome. I'm just saying. Just
like you can buy insurance.
They can count stage playoffs. They can do whatever they want.
They can do whatever they want, especially since I'm the silent puppet master. But no, I'm not playing Ado, although I might literally be playing him out of necessity. I don't think there's many situations in the new scoring system where you would have to play him. I'm probably still not going to play him, but I might play him in old scoring format in a league where there's literally no other DPS on the bench or unsigned, and no one's going to trade to the person in first place. And I got rid of and my backup DPSs are literally tending unborn children in China. So I don't know.
Well, okay, Blevins, I do have one advice for you. In the words of Shia LaBeouf, just do it.
I'm picking him up off of free agency as we speak.
Well, you stole at least half of what I was going to say, Blevins, and that's old scoring format. I think Ado, if he plays, I wouldn't play him unless I got some tweet or some notification like he's in, we know. But Ado can fill in old scoring format, as well as I think there's just 10-team leagues out there that are hurting. You're going to be hurting so bad. I mean, I know I have 10-man teams that might be making that particular move. So it's something to keep an eye out. But again, this is only if we get undeniable proof beforehand that he's going to be starting. I just think the only DPS player has such a chance to like rack up, even if the team is really low on kills. Like he should have all of them. Or at least a good portion of them. So hopefully that does pretty well. And I'm definitely staying away from Fearless. Like Roshan's been bad, but he's not been alone in being bad. And the lack of support he's been getting is going to be a problem for Fearless as well. So we'll see how that carries over when everybody else gets here again. I think stage 3 is where we might kind of unlock some Shanghai Dragons for fantasy purposes. But the last bit of news that I want to talk about and go over here, and we'll start off with Blevins this time, but Moth is taking over for Dak or Dahak or however I'm supposed to say this particular name. And he looked pretty good this week. I mean, obviously San Francisco got the upset win over the Houston Outlaws. I'm blanking on their other performance on the week, although I'm just covering while I go to find it.
1-3 loss to London.
Okay, yeah. Did take a map off of London, which to me was a little bit of a surprise, though I think I went with the Cowards 3-0 in Pick'em. But Blevins, are you willing to play Moth, or what circumstances? Obviously this is going to be a new scoring format thing, but what are we thinking about his play this week?
Yeah, I think he won his spot here this week. They got the upset win. In no short reason due to him. He definitely contributed. He looked good. They've got 2 like winnable but not guaranteed matches this week against Florida and Boston. So I'd pick him up, especially since well, actually, I don't even think he's in the game right now. But if he's in the game, I'd try to pick him up. Yeah, I think he's a decent pickup. Would I play him this week? I mean, the problem is that I guess it depends on who your support is, but I've got like top tier supports in most of my leagues. So, I mean, I'm not playing him over Jonak, that's for sure. I'm probably not playing him over Jaehong. So I would pick him up, but I don't know if I'd play him this week.
Yeah, I tend to agree as well. We don't really know how his performance is going to translate into fantasy points, but Lord Asmith, is there anything you'd like to add to this conversation about Moth?
I like him. He looked like a fragging Lucio. Like he looked like he was doing really well with the team overall. I have good feelings about him, but as a whole, we know that Lucio players don't tend to score that well. So they're going to be middlings, regardless of whether he's the best Lucio out there. So, I mean, I think you pick him up if you had like somebody like Dak or
Shanghai.
yeah, or like if
Boink,
you have Toby,
or if you're sitting there with like
Boink
Nuss or Closer on London, those guys split so much.
Yeah, I think he'd be a legitimate pickup if you have another Lucio player that's not Big Goose. I don't see any other Lucio players that are really putting up good points. So especially while they're playing Lucio. So I think that he might be up there, but we haven't seen it. And I mean, I could technically have crunched the numbers, but it was too much math. For my
Yeah, I
brain
was
to
going to
work.
say, we don't even know how many points. I mean, it's not, it's technically possible for us to know.
It's in the system to, like I could have really struggled to figure it out, but I might come back and do it. Who knows? If I'm just free next week.
Well, keep an eye on the Twitter. Hopefully we can get Asmith to post a tweet if he does go ahead and figure out what he would have scored. But I think we're all pretty much in lockstep agreement here. He's an ad. He's just not a play yet. We want to wait and see it. It takes a lot. You have to be a pretty big goose in order to be a viable start from the Lucio position so far. No small geese allowed. Moths are typically much smaller than geese.
Much smaller.
So
God, I hope so.
Take that for a while. It would be a scary moth if it wasn't. Let's just say that.
Scary moth.
Terrible, especially a big goose. But anyways, let's move this section along and start to talk about some of the leaders and feeders from last week. We'll begin on the tank section here. Lord Asmith, why don't you kick us off and take the first tank leader?
Look, the first guy that just tore it up this week was Gamsu. He put up 239. He was 7 points shy of putting up 393. Yeah, 293. I don't know what, my brain's not working. Sorry, guys. 293 points, 7 points shy of 300. Number 1 overall tank player, number 2 overall player, period. I mean, there's nothing to say other than he came back from Korea with vengeance and just dominated. He looked really good. That week off did him some serious favors, and I think he's going to continue to be a startable player. He did not lose his position due to sickness that he was, so a lot of us were thinking, well, Kalios looked pretty decent, but I mean, Gamsu came back and showed that he deserves to stay there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Kalios showed exactly what we needed to see from him in order to be sure, because Gamsu showed more than enough. Exactly what we needed to see in order to be confident that he was going to keep his job, because I do think Kalios played well enough to ask the question, right? Like after the brutal start from the Boston Uprising, and similar to what I kind of outlined after that brutal start was like, is this team just going to get better over the stage? Are they starting from a blank slate and need to adapt to the meta and start over again? And they really did that a little bit. And I think that Gamsu needed to come in and look maybe not heads and shoulders better than Kalios did, in filling in for him, but he did nonetheless. So whether or not he needed to do all that to keep his spot, he certainly did, and I think he's right back to a viable starting tank. So if you've been missing him on your fantasy teams, I think you can play him going forward without much worry.
Yep.
I'm going to take the next one here because it's probably the only nice thing I'm going to get to say about my Houston Outlaws throughout the week this week. But Muma was a really solid performer. He was the number 5 overall tank this week. He scored 234 points. A really solid performance. He was, the raucous was this for Houston last week, right? Like they disappointed. They didn't look great, but they had one rock steady, solid player that they could really rely on, and that definitely didn't disappoint fantasy owners. That was Muma. A phenomenal matchup. The Fissure-Muma matchup in their first matchup of the week was absolutely something to see. And words out, Muma's pretty good, right? So I think you can count on him going forward in fantasy as the team struggles and they're look to finally be addressing their problems. So hopefully we do see them make some improvements and be able to capitalize on the incredible amounts of space that Muma can create in fights. But Blevins, talk to us about our last tank leader for the week.
Yeah, that is going to be the man, the myth, the best beard in Overwatch League himself, Fraggy. 206 points, number 6 overall tank. It's interesting here that he scored about the same number of points per map as Muma. He played one fewer map, but Philly went 2-0 this week, and Houston went 0-2. So Muma, I mean, getting that extra map mattered so much more for them than winning or losing. It just kind of reiterates the fact of like, these 4-0 stomps are not good for fantasy teams. So just keep that in mind. Overall a good performance, but if you look at the results of how the teams did, you'd think Fraggy would have more points than Muma, but it's actually the other way around here.
Yeah, and I think it moved, like Fraggy got at least 20 points from locking Sideshow out of using the bathroom at the Philadelphia team house in that video. That was definitely a top tier, one of the biggest plays of the week. But let's move along here. We only have 2 support leaders for the week. We made the conscious decision not to force ourselves to have 3, so that way we're not just kind of like, you know, saying things we don't necessarily mean. But there was only a couple people that really outperformed from the support department. So Blevins, lead us off with the first support leader.
Yeah, we'll go with Boombox here. Number 1 overall support, number 4, or number one support, number 4 overall. And we're going to be talking about him in a little bit in another section. But you know, a really monumental performance for Boombox. This is by almost 100 points his best performance ever. His next closest was 213 in week number 6. I mean, I'll save some of the other points that we're going to talk about in the Douse the Flame section, but really good week from Boombox.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Well, if you couldn't guess, his last week was 63 and the week before was 92.
All I'll say is that one of us, somebody here, may or may not have picked Boombox as a support sleeper. I'm just throwing it out there. But anyways, Lord A. Smith, it wasn't Lord A. Smith, by the way, since I have to call him Lord all day. Spoil that right there. But yeah, Lord A. Smith, talk to us about the last support leader for week 4 of stage 2.
All right, the last support leader was somebody who will shock you a lot, and not by the fact that they're on the shock. It's Nuss, who is on the London Spitfire. He put up 207 points, number 4 overall support this week. He really did very surprising, mainly considering because he's a Lucio player. Yeah. And you know, they obviously play other positions. You know, the meta is not just Lucio anymore, so they kind of sprinkle in other positions. But Nuss he did really well. He actually outshined Bedozin. Bedozin only put up 163, whereas Nuss put up over 207 points. That's easily the highest of his career so far per week. And I think that's the highest I've seen a Lucio player since Lucio has been in the meta. So really good. It looks like the Bedozin and Nuss may be their go-to starters, the A team, if you will.
You can only hope so, because I really think that's one of the things that looking at the numbers and just the performance, the eyeball test certainly tells you London's a better team with those 2 support players out there. But yeah, big performance here from Nuss on the Lucio role. Probably one of the better Lucio performances that we've seen so far in this stage. So definitely got to give props to that one. Let's move into the DPS though, have a conversation here. We had another one of those big 300 point totals here. So Lord A. Smith, why don't you give us that one and talk to us about who was the king of the week this week?
The king of the week, rarely do we see 300-point weeks. I think we were totaling it up. I think there are only 3 other players who have had 300 points, and that's Jonak, Carpe, and Gesture, who are all the top at their position. And now this guy who has overtaken the top in the DPS role, and that's Striker. He put up 314 points. Number 1 DPS, number 1 overall. And like I called last week, Tracers do really well in this meta. Tracers are your players to own, and Boston was kind of flexing their muscle, and having, a guy like Gamsu and Striker in the top shows that they really kind of flex their muscle this weekend, and almost it was, as one would say, like a return to form, how they were in stage 1 near the end. They have continued to get better over time, and Striker has been a solid, consistent player. He has been very close to 300 already. He put up 299 in week 3, so 300 finally getting there. It's a very elite league, elite club, if you will.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what happens with Boston as stage 3 kicks off, since a lot of the map pool is going to be repeats of the past, with the exception of Blizzard World, things like that. It should be pretty interesting to see how Boston reacts to that. But one more week here, and it's worth noting as well, excuse me one second, Striker did have a big performance previously as well. He was 299, so he's not been in the 300 club before, but he was really, really close. And when this team's working, they're firing on all cylinders. And both of the, like, Dreamcasper had a very good rebound week as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do when things reset again. But at least for one more week, you guys should have solid starters. Nonetheless, with no issues, I have no problems with them going forward. But the next DPS leader for the week, I'll take this one. This was Soon. He was the number 2 DPS player, the number 5 overall with 274 points. The LA Valiant are kind of a difficult team to pin down. They've been a little inconsistent. I mean, we've got this performance from Soon, but they lost to Florida this week. And granted, losing to Florida might not be what it was like in stage 1 or even earlier in this stage.
Boston,
but
too.
Yeah, they lost to Boston as well. So the Los Angeles Valiant are kind of continuing to show some inconsistencies and some struggles here. Did a lot of damage to their stage 2 playoff hopes, although they are the last team still mathematically in the race, if what I'm looking at is accurate. Overwatch League hasn't been kind enough to release the stage 2 standings for us, but you know, as far as Soon is concerned, he's been kind of the lock and load guy. Their rock. He's been very consistent. He's a very smart player. He's got easily the best chant in the Overwatch League so far. But yeah,
Shields Up is pretty good.
Shields Up is really good. Also, I think people should just be going goose. That I haven't heard near enough of that. Hopefully that starts to pick up if we ever get there and there's a gladiators match going on. You can count on me and Blevins leading that particular chant. But
and bring a giant cardboard cutout of Tony Saragusa as well.
Yes, I will pretend like I know who Tony Saragusa is.
How do you not know who he is? He's a football player. He's I'll send you a picture. He is a big goose, let me tell you.
Well, I would believe you there. But let's move on, and I'm going to have to just fess up. I don't know who I threw the first one to, so whoever hasn't given us a DPS leader, Blevins, take it away.
It's going to be me, yeah. It's going to be Prophet here, 240 points, number 3 DPS. You know, not a ton to say here. You know, they stomped Seoul, which is kind of crazy, and they beat San Francisco 3-1. So, I mean, we're seeing good points out of Prophet. It does seem like he's on their A team, but it's still like it's very hard for me. Like ever since the beginning of the league, it's hard for me to own and use London players because they are feast or famine. Like they just sometimes just don't play their players. Even though Prophet,
it would be one thing if they played and did poorly. It's another much more frustrating thing to experience them just not playing. Also, one thing I want to point out here while we're looking at it, the combined map score for both matchups that have been London versus Seoul is 8-0 in favor of the London Spitfire. And this is far from the first matchup where we're seeing where, like, the standings don't necessarily matter, or what we've seen in the past doesn't necessarily matter. Sometimes these teams just match up really, really well against each other. We've seen Philly now get 2-0, 2 wins on Houston Outlaws when Houston was playing well. So I think there's definitely some surprise to that. We've got Houston just having London's number 2-0 so far. I mean, if you discount the playoffs, now we've got London over Seoul. So these are things that we need to track and keep an eye on when we're looking at Pick'em. And we're looking at how these matchups are going to play out later in fantasy. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. 2 matchups is too small of a sample size to call it here.
If you go back to Apex too with Busan, like they have the tape, they have like the game plan against them.
Yeah,
like,
Busan.
They don't run those players. They have the game plan.
And at the end of the final season of Apex, a lot of us, myself included Kongdu Panthera above Lunatic High in the kind of power rankings there for Apex teams.
And it could be mentioned that, I mean, look, even when GC Busan played the old Lunatic High, they never lost a map either. Prophet and Gesture have never lost a map against the Seoul core, ever. Isn't that crazy?
That is pretty crazy.
Like, mind blown.
Yeah. Well, something to definitely keep an eye on going forward. But let's move into the feeders section of this conversation, talk about some players who may have been responsible for some of our losses, in the sense that we don't want to take responsibility for our own choices here. But on the tank side of things, again, we've only got 2 tanks and 2 supports here, so I'll be sitting out and just kind of supplementing the conversation. But Lord Asmith, as we listen to your trumpets once again, I'm trying to sprinkle him in, not use him every time, but use him on occasion. Talk to us about the first tank feeder of the week.
Look, First Tank Feeder is a player who has normally been the top of the tank rolls for the longest time. He's actually, right now on season long, he's the number 5 over tank, but this week it was Envy, and he put up 127 points. That's number 14 overall tank for him. That's not what you expect from him. You expect a top 5, at least top 10 tank from him week in and week out. He's been very consistent in that, and even in the new weeks, he's not been awful. Well, I take that back. 102, 180, 120, 127. He just, yeah, Envy has not been good this whole stage, really. And though his high points totals for the first stage have been great, he's been kind of very pedestrian in a way. And I wouldn't say he's a just must-start tank anymore. You know, like the number 14 overall tank is not usually a must-start tank for you.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on going forward. Blevins, who do you got for the second tank feeder for last week?
Yeah, we've got Nevix here, number 22 tank. Nevix is, you know, I don't think you could say as big of a feeder as Envy was here. He's ranked down number 19 or number 18 overall on the season. But I mean, when you're scoring under 100 points, he had 66 points. That's just a player you don't even necessarily. That's a tank you don't even necessarily want on your team. But you know, he's had 100, 108, 137. I mean, he had a low week the first week of stage 1. But in stage 1, he never had under 100, and he actually had a 200 point week back in week 4. It's just this stage just does not seem like his high is 137. That's just not that's not startable. That's not where you want to be. And if he you know continues to have these sub 100 weeks, he might just be a ship him away type of player.
Definitely could see it. The one nice thing I will say about Nevix is for an off-tank player, he is really good at Genji. But let's move on and talk about some of these support players here that maybe let us down a little bit this week. Lord Asmith, talk to us about the first one here.
Look, I'll take a Sleepy. He didn't do as well as he has been doing in the past. He put up 147 points. That's number 15 overall. He's a top 5 support. He usually puts up high numbers. Even in stage 2, he's been putting up over 200 points for most of the weeks here. And this week, he just kind of had a fall off. Even a win. They had a win over Houston. And even in the win, you would expect them to have done well, but he really didn't shine as much as we would have liked to see from a player of his caliber. He only put up 82 points as opposed to the 65 in the loss. So it's kind of shocking to me, but I mean, it seems like other players kind of took that role for him, and it's very possible that Moth took some of those points from him. So, you know, we don't have the numbers yet, but we will hopefully. So I think it's just an off week for Sleepy, though. I think he's going to bounce back pretty good.
Yeah, I think Moth should help hopefully stabilize him quite a bit. And Sleepy is, as far back as the preseason, I can remember thinking to myself, man, he looks much better when there's a Lucio there to like peel for him and help keep him alive. So hopefully bringing in the new support and getting a little bit higher quality of play, I think we can safely say we saw that last week, at least, that it was a slight improvement. Hopefully that helps Sleepy out quite a bit. I do think he's got what it takes to be a really good, at least fantasy player here for us going forward. But Blevins, take the next support here is man, this is a tough one too, because it's so hard to know when it's the player's fault and when it's not. But nonetheless, a lot of people were holding on to this guy on their bench, and he didn't really pull through, which is, I'm basically saying all this just to be able to use the Fuel's bad man joke. But go ahead and talk to us about the last support feeder of the week.
Yeah, it's Chips High in here, 120 points. That was number 17 support overall. And if you look at this stage, he's just been feeding the whole stage. Obviously, he didn't play a number of weeks, and his role in the lineup, his role on the team, all that stuff is still in flux. And even when he is playing, he's still putting up sub 150 points. Granted, in the Mercy meta, he was putting up, he had a couple of 230 plus weeks, but now it's sparse as to whether he's even playing, and when he does, it's not even great. I don't want anything to do with chips here.
Yeah, Dallas is in such a weird spot right now. The torch has been passed as far as decision making goes. If we can believe Hastro's tweets, that things are kind of fully in Kai's hands now to make these decisions. Yeah. And I think on the overall, they look significantly better in their second matchup. And as far as what lineups they were picking, not necessarily in the outcome, but there's just a lot going on with this team, and I'm not even sure how much we can blame the supports that's been going on, or what the correct support lineup is at this point. But I do tend to think it probably includes Harry Hook. He's just so versatile, and he's been their Lucio for so long. It seems like if we're getting back to that meta a little bit, I'd like to see him in there. But I'm staying away from all the supports on the Dallas Fuel right now. I just have no confidence that they're not going to switch every single week going forward. But moving on here, let's talk about some of the DPS feeders from last week. And the first one, I'm going to take it because I've been quiet for all the feeders so far, is the biggest surprise, hands down. This is an MVP candidate. This is a number one pick candidate in a lot of leagues, like after like late starting leagues where we started to see things play out a little bit. We were taking this guy number one. Fleta, the man, the myth, the legend himself, only 106 points this week. Good for the number 20 DPS on the week. Personally, I'm throwing it out. This is only one bad week, so it would be wrong to overreact to it.
Last week was pretty bad too.
I don't remember him being. He sat out. Yeah,
he sat out, which might even be even more telling. He had 4 more points last week when he sat out.
Well, it's definitely eye-raising, but for my own money here, I'm not worrying about it. If I've got him, I paid too much for him to just stop using him, and I think
cost fallacy for sure.
Yeah, you're definitely in that territory. But I just don't have any worries about this going forward. I mean, they got stomped, which isn't going to happen very much. They're too good of a team for that to happen with any regularity. They don't have the most difficult matchups. We'll be going through the matchups in just a minute here, so we won't go into detail on that, but they've definitely got a chance at a get-right week this week. So I'm obviously continuing to roll this guy out there. I think everybody should continue to roll this guy out there. Just call it what it is. Sometimes bad weeks have outliers.
He's still your best player. He lost you this week, but he's still your best player.
Yes. And it's a long season, so on the overall, you should be just fine with 1 week of 106 points. Lord Asmith, why don't you take it away and talk about DPS feeder number 2?
Look, I'm going to take feeder number 2 here, but I'm going to take the different one. I'm going to take AKM here. He put up 10 points. 10.
They weren't
count
cowards,
them on
though.
Both hands.
They were not
both
cowardly.
Hands. He played 5 maps. 5 maps. That's 2 points per map.
That's
2.
awful.
2 points per map. Literally 2.
Do you want to say Fuel's bad mad this time?
I want to say you take those 2 points and you turn them sideways and just do that.
Yeah, that's exactly what you do. Bye. See you later, dude. Look, I don't know.
I can get more than 2 points in Overwatch League in 5 maps.
I don't know about that, man.
I don't know about that either.
I wouldn't be playing. Yes, that's for sure. But I think I could.
No, don't count on it.
If you were playing Mercy and you only played 1 map, I feel confident that if the team tried very hard to keep you alive, you might be able to score 5 points.
Yeah. You put the
I don't know. It depends on if it's a Widow map or not. Because if there's a Widow, I'm just dead.
Yeah, you'll die instantly there. It would be map dependent. Whether or not you could get 5 points would be map dependent. There's a lot at stake. It would be.
I'm definitely calling the episode. Blevins scores more points than AKM this week.
Well, first of all, I name the episodes, and I'm the one that asks you for help because I'm terrible at it every time. So we'll just go with that. But let's get the last DPS. Go ahead.
Let me finish this rant, okay?
Go ahead.
Because
I love your rants about Dallas. So,
dude, look, guys. We've had this AKM experiment. We've tried playing around them. It's obviously not worked. I don't know why we haven't just decided to completely move on to Rascal. It looked like we kind of did that for a little bit in the third in the last game that we played, and granted it didn't work out, but there are more problems than just AKM with this team, and I listed them in the Discord. There are so many problems right now, but I think trying to build your team around AKM is not a winning strategy. It's kind of like what San Francisco tried to do with Baby Bay in the beginning, and that didn't work either. It's the same kind of standpoint. They have a very similar hero pool, and some would say that Baby Bay might even be better at other characters than what AKM is. So it just seems like a losing situation. I plead with Kai maybe that we just need to move on to the Rascal situation and at least try dive or try something different here.
Yeah, at the end of the day, for my money, Rascal's Soldier is good enough that if under any circumstance you have AKM playing Genji in your lineup, you have chosen the wrong player to be in the lineup for that particular time. Only on a 100% Soldier 76 scenario would I be playing AKM there. But we will see, because now their priorities are shifting, I feel like, with Dallas. Now they don't have to care about wins and losses, right? Like, that ship's sailed. They're not going to get it back. So now they can worry about building the team for what they want in the future. And if that future includes AKM, maybe we see it and they figure out how best to work with them. I really don't know. But for the time being, at least, following a 2 points per map basis here, I think we can safely leave AKM on the bench for a while. And for what it's worth, even with that said, I still think the best route for Dallas is Effect and Rascal. The more practice you can get those two guys together, I think that's your future answer more so than anything else. But we will see. That's going to move us into the map, or the
we got one more feed.
Oh, we do have one more
GPS feeder.
I skipped, and my memory's bad, so whoever it's supposed to be, start talking.
It'll be me. It was Kareev this week, 85 points, number 22 DPS overall. Look, he swapped between DPS and support this week, so that did not help him. They also, Valiant also looking inconsistent. They lost to Uprising and to Florida this week. Just kind of a tire fire for the Valiant. Hopefully they can figure some stuff out for their sake. But 85 points from, I mean, we were talking all Kareev the last 2-3 weeks. Obviously you got I think they hot fixed Kareev in the middle of that week he changed, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you didn't even get a free like super week of him getting support points when he played DPS. And he's been good. He's been a good player, and I don't think that's necessarily going to change. He's put up a lot of points, and this is definitely an outlier in a similar vein to Fleta. I mean, he's still the number 6 overall DPS player in the league for the season, so I don't think you're changing anything here. It was just it was a feed week, and you may very well have lost this week at the hand of Kareev attacking himself, rather.
Yeah, an interesting performance there. Kind of falls in step with the rest of the Valiant players. You can continue to roll them out.
Yeah, it's just the last thing I'll say is it's just interesting to see how certain players, and I don't even necessarily think it's certain positions, it's just certain players can still get points when they lose. Like you look at Muma
and Raucus on Houston. Soon on this same team where the Valiant players are struggling.
Kareev just sits down. So that is definitely something to take note of going forward as well. Take a look at how your players do when they get 0-4 and also versus when they 4-0. Because if you can get a player like a Muma who you don't even care who they're playing against or how they do, like he's still going to get you he's still going to have a solid performance and still get you fantasy points. Just a rip if you're, a fan of the of the Outlaws, but you can still bank on Muma for your fantasy team.
There's an Arhan-shaped light at the end of the tunnel for us Houston fans, so don't worry. We're finding a way to get by. But let's move along here, and I just want to point out as we move into the weekly preview section, we did receive some feedback that maybe this is a little bit repetitive, and I we're going to continue to do it. We're just going to try to adapt it to make it a little less so. We're trying to keep an eye on the people that like only listen to Foul Play or maybe don't consume every bit of podcast media that's out there for Overwatch leaks. We're trying to find a happy medium. Please keep the feedback coming, though. It helps us evolve the show.
Yeah,
and
let us
it means
know.
a lot to us. So let us know if this is better, worse, any impact, any impact on your enjoyment of the show. We want to know about it. Definitely let us know. But I start things off here. Blevins gets to mute his mic and take a break.
Woo!
And I'm going to lead us off with the Atlantic Division. At the very beginning here, we've got the Boston Uprising. They go against the San Francisco Shock and the Los Angeles Gladiators this week. So kind of an easy matchup-ish, depending on how Sinatra impacts the team. And then we've got the Gladiators, which I think has potential to be really, really close. These are two similar teams, kind of aggressively minded, dive-based teams. 6 maps here for Boston. They do play on Thursday and Saturday, so no quick turnaround or anything like that. How are you going to possibly bench your Boston Uprising players after the week they just had for you? Like, you're just finally feeling like you're getting them back, so by all means, continue to use them. The next team we're going to talk about is the surging Florida Mayhem, who are just completely different human beings playing this game of Overwatch lately. They go against the San Francisco Shock and the Seoul Dynasty here. Only 5 maps, and again, not a very quick turnaround Wednesday and Friday. The one thing I want to say is Florida Mayhem is in particular looked really, really bad on Hollywood. Manitin has gone so far as to say, yeah, we're awful at it. We always have been. So we're trying to use a triple tank strategy here. Worth noting, they don't have to play Hollywood against San Francisco. They do play it against Seoul, so I think we can expect at least 1 bad map there, though it's probably going to be closer to 3 or 4 bad maps in that particular matchup. All in all here, I think your Florida Mayhem players are turning around. They're playing better, even in bad maps and things like that. They're performing in a way that we haven't seen in a while. The signing of say a player coming in and joining the Florida Mayhem, he's not there yet, but it has lit a fire under Logix, who very clearly wants to keep his starting job. So all in all, I think that was kind of the key to the Florida Mayhem, right? Like, they weren't getting big plays from their DPS. Now they are. It's lifting up everybody, the supports, the tanks, the DPS. Everybody's been a much better fantasy play for the Florida Mayhem here. Listen, use them like you wished you used them last week, because I think we can count on some solid performances. Maybe not 2 weeks ago good. Number 1 and number 3 overall DPS performances. Like, I don't expect that. But I do think they've become very startable, very solid players here going forward. So by all means, feel free to use them. Now we talk about the Houston Outlaws. They've got obviously some big problems here going forward. They need to address some things. They seem a little less than eager to admit that there's a problem at all to begin with. But we're looking at this here with matchups against the Shanghai Dragons and the Seoul Dynasty. Listen, I don't expect Seoul to like go into a tailspin or anything like that following the loss to the London Spitfire, but I do think Houston.
Say they're picking up tailspin. Is that what I heard?
No, I said I don't expect Seoul to go into a tailspin.
Confirmed. Tailspin play.
Tailspin to the Seoul
Yes.
Dynasty. Lock it up. It's happening. Also, talking about Houston is a very realistic chance for somebody to say Shanghai Dynasty this week, considering those are the 2 opponents. But nonetheless, here on the overall for Houston, I want to say Kings Row and Gibraltar are the last 2 maps for Houston. They are a much better team. They are a much more competitive team, despite the rough Kings Row this week. That was more of a one play goes a different way, right? Like, if they just hit the graviton with the Hanzo Alive 5 seconds earlier, I think they're able to at least complete the first point on Kings Row and make a map of that. And they went as far as to say, it was a really good map for us, so we didn't worry about it. Like, we had a week and a half off where we didn't have to play it, so their preparation on it dipped. They didn't have a contingency plan. I don't expect that to be an issue going forward. So I am more than happy to use, Linkser like I would normally, Muma like I would normally, any of the players that I would normally use. I'm staying away from Jake. You can't pay me to play Clockwork, but you know what I mean? You can use your guys normally here like you would Houston. Shanghai, who knows what state their roster is going to be in, but I think if it's a competitive matchup, that's good for you in fantasy, even if that's a tragedy for, a travesty for, Houston fans and the team as an overall. From a fantasy perspective, you don't have to care about that, so you can just kind of play these guys like you normally would. London Spitfire have matchups against Shanghai and Dallas, 6 6 maps. I'm sorry. Houston is the last match Wednesday and the first match Thursday, so a very fast turnaround there for whatever that's worth. London is another fast turnaround. The last of Friday, the first of Saturday. That's an even faster, as fast as it possibly can be from a sheer time perspective. And Shanghai and Dallas are the opponents with 6 maps. I'm very worried about London splitting their team again here, so be very mindful of that. Nothing new as far as that's concerned. Like, you only don't worry about that when they have a long break in between 2 very difficult opponents. But on the overall, you know what you've got at this point, and you can kind of continue to use them as you normally would. New York, rumor has it, is really, really good. You were going to want to bench Pine because apparently he's too tired to play or something like that. I don't know. It was an interesting.
I don't even want to get into that right
interesting now. Insight there that we got in one of their matchups, but nonetheless, it's not really hurting them. Dallas and the Valiant here. I love when those 2 teams are an opponent because it's like Dal and Vale in the abbreviations. I don't know. It tickles me. 7 maps here, and they play on Thursday and Saturday. So nothing to say about New York. They're locked and loaded, good to go. Heads and shoulders the best team in the Overwatch League right now. Continue to lean on them. The Philadelphia Fusion take a trip to Los Angeles, even though they live in Los Angeles, but they play against both LA teams this week. 6 maps, Wednesday and Friday. Fusion has proven to be a little more inconsistent. I think we've completely settled the EQO versus Shadowburn debate for this stage at least, so we can expect them to stay in it. Philadelphia does have a shot at the stage playoffs still, so they're clearly going to be giving it their all, pulling out all the stops this week. I have no issues playing all of them. I think the matchups on the overall are winnable. They're kind of perfect in my mind for fantasy here because I think there's serious 5-map potential. I do expect Carpe to be back and not to be the Snillo show this week, unless they're really trying to up his trade value to move him or something like that. I think that's the only reason we would see Snillo again, is if they're trying to make a move on one of these Tracer players. But it was good to see him get incorporated in this week. But that's going to wrap up the Atlantic Division. On the overall, looking at this week, it's basically like thumbs up for everybody. I'm not really scared of any one team. I don't think any of them are heads and shoulders better matchups than a lot of other ones. But Asmith, let's see if that holds true for the Pacific Division here.
Meanwhile, in the Pacific Division here, you're living in dumpster territory because we're going to start it off with Dallas right now, and they have New York and London. Hey, rumor has it, both of these teams are really, really good. Shocker. I don't expect Dallas to do anything here, regardless of how many maps they have or when they play. It doesn't matter. Dallas, stay away from them. We're going to move on to LA Gladiators, and they play Boston and Philly this week. I really, really like this matchup and the potential for 5-game maps here against both Philly and Boston. And I think these are both upside here. Fisher has been dominant, and even with the 3 DPS lineup they have, they're still putting up respectable points. I just like the Gladiators in this matchup here. Moving on to the other Los Angeles team in the Valiant. They are playing Philly and New York, and right now you've got a struggling Valiant team where with uncertainty on Kareev and things, but the one thing you know for sure is Soon and Fate are going to get their points, and that's a guaranteed. You can write that down as long as they don't get benched, which we haven't seen Grim Reality or Numlock ever. So I don't foresee that happening. You just ride it out with Valiant. It may be bad, worse matchup for them this week, but overall they're going to be all right. Next is Shock, and I really, really like their matchup this week. They're playing Boston and Florida, and this might be one of Shock's best possible matchups here for a whole week-wise. Granted, both Florida and Boston have been looking better. There's still the chance that they turn an upset here. They have Moth in the lineup now, and they looked a little better with Moth in the lineup after beating Houston. So this could be very interesting here. I don't expect them to win both of these games, but there's a possibility of 5. They did beat Boston last time they played them, so keep an eye on that. Next, we got the Seoul Dynasty, and they play Houston and Florida. There is potential here for a B team to get played. I won't completely count your full teams here. Don't count that Fleta and Munchkin are just must starts here. you know, if you have them and you go with it, then go. But there is very, very much potential, especially because they're gearing up for the playoffs as well, which is Sunday right after these matches. There's potential that they might want to rest one of their guys, because even if they lose this game, they're still going to be in the playoffs, it looks like, due to their map differential and things. Lastly, we're going to Shanghai, and as we all know, stay away from Shanghai, but I see a matchup here this week, and they might actually get a win this week. I mean, they are playing the slumping dumpster team right now that is the Houston Outlaws. Oh, sorry. Did you hear that?
I thought it was Dallas. If you said dumpster, I just assumed it was Dallas.
My bad.
Okay, kids, be nice.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Misery loves
Shanghai's
company.
not going to win. We know Shanghai's not going to win, guys, especially with both their DPS out of country. Don't play Shanghai. I'm just kidding. They probably won't win unless Houston just throws completely.
I mean, I would be able to buy it as a possibility, even with my love of Houston. I'd be able to buy it as a possibility if they had a hit scan DPS player to hang around.
I mean,
like
if they had
in the country.
Undead and Dia, maybe, but
I might have very little
can't
faith
buy
in Clockwork and in Jake. However, I have more faith in them to play Tracer than I do Roshan, for example, who might be available or might be flexing over, depending on how it goes. But I will say I did take your advice, and I literally wrote on my whiteboard that Soon and Fate will get their points. So I did take a little bit of your advice there. But moving on, let's talk about the sleepers here going into this next week. And again, for the DPS, we do have Lord Asmith at the top. He won the Lord bet, so clearly he's going to be at the top of the sleeper section, gets to pick first, as he went with EQO last week. One thing I do want to say is both of the sleepers, like, that was one heck of a Lord bet, because the both DPS players that we chose and bet with were top 10 performances. I'm clearly the only loser. If anybody chose either of our two picks and used our advice there, I'm the only one that could have possibly lost that one, because both of them did play great. But Lord Asmith, kick us off here while I play your trumpets.
I love it. I'm really gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna pick Sinatra as my sleeper this week. We did recently bump it up to where we can pick a top 15 for DPS, because we were kind of having trouble finding the right people. But to be honest, after looking at everybody, I like Sinatra's chances, and I think the San Francisco Shock have a good potential matchups here, with possibilities of going to 5 both here. And if Sinatra ends up being the star player that they want him to be, then you could see high points, especially since he is a Tracer, and Tracers put up a lot of points if you haven't noticed. So I'm going to ride with Sinatra. We'll see what happens, but I'm going to ride with him and cross my fingers.
Well, I'm going to take the player that got Blevins third place in this particular debate last week, and I'm going to go with Asher, because listen, he might have been only good for third place, but he still had a pretty good week this week. He just didn't pop off like he quite did the week before. He was still very, very solid, though. And listen, it's really easy to look at and point at Fissure as the thing that changed for the Los Angeles Gladiators. But the other thing for me that changed was Asher fulfilling his destiny here, what he was signed for. He was thought to be one of the elite Tracer players, and he really didn't live up to that with the old composition of the team. And I don't know that we can give it all to Fissure. Like, clearly something else changed, I guess, for Asher. But the only issue with him right now is playtime. He does sit some because Hydration and Surefour are also having their carry moments. Like, they have 3 very, very capable DPS players who are performing at a top level. Asher's certainly one of them, and I don't know. There's just something about this LA Gladiators team right now. I'm buying in. I want to pick up any piece of them I possibly can, so I'm going to take them to claim the DPS sleeper section this week. Blevins, who do you got?
Yeah, I've got the good old reliable Plupster to Vic. They've got not an easy road right now, but I guess they never had an easy road, right? They were not 3 weeks ago. I get laughed off the stage every time I pick them, but now I probably am still getting laughed off the stage, but they at least have an outside chance here. They've got San Francisco Shock as their first match. Definitely a lot of potential there. To at the very least go to 5. Win or loss is not particularly relevant for for fantasy. So I think that's a good point scoring match there. And then Soul Dynasty could be a dumpster fire for sure, but you know, it's also possible that Florida can pull something out. Florida, at the very least, while they don't have a ton of wins by any stretch of the imagination, they've been able to scrape map wins off of just about everyone, and they've absolutely had matches where they just kind of turn off and basically go to sleep. But it seems like those types of maps are becoming few and far between. So I've got a lot of faith in Florida here, and it's only mildly because of the meme, but mostly because I think they actually are turning on here a little bit.
Yeah, there's certainly evidence of it, for sure. I mean, in the last 2 weeks alone, you can see it. Even when like you said, even when they're having their bad maps, they look better. Than
everything looks close.
I think I might actually be picking Florida to get a win this week for the first time since like week 2 of stage 1. But moving along here, let's talk about the tank section. And the Blevins won with his Poco pick last week. So who do you got this week?
I've got Note this week. They've got San Francisco Shock here and LA Gladiators. So again, it really depends on a lot of different factors whether who's going to win these matches, but definitely a lot of go to 5 potential here. Granted, Boston has been known this stage for being the either 4-0 or get 4-0'd team as of late, but without the superstition behind it, I think San Francisco Shock definitely going to be a close matchup, a potential for 5, and LA Gladiators might be the real deal and just crush Boston, but I think that at the very least it does have some map 5 potential here. So you could see a 10 map week out of Boston here, and that's going to look good for any player, Note included.
And to give you a little bit more of a boost with the Note pick, they don't play on King's Row, which I think they bring Note out for Kalios for because of the Zarya play. So it is Hollywood both matches for the Boston Uprising this week, making that a pretty solid pick there. I like it. Lord Asmith, who do you got for your tank sleeper of the week?
Look, I'm going to roll with the best Genji diva player ever, and that would be your boy Nevix.
Cruz?
Cruz?
No, that's a Lucio Genji player. That's
he plays,
I get confused.
Back straight. Nevix, I really like this whole San Francisco pick here, and I mean, look, we're stuck here picking middling diva players right now. I mean, that's kind of our pool for sleepers, is which middling diva player do we think is going to pop off. And I mean, I think Nevix really has a legitimate shot. I'm going for the win here. I like my pick over the other picks here, so I really feel like Nevix can shine.
As much as I would hate to have to call you Lord 2 weeks in a row, I will put my tank sleeper against your tank sleeper this week in a Lord bet, if you'd like.
Cool, man.
I was going to say, before I even give it away.
Let me look.
It is before you give it away.
Let me look at who they're playing.
All right, you decide while I give the spiel on Cool Man. Listen, Cool Man I'm picking in a large part because he has like fallen down to eligibility here, right? So he's somebody that's scored enough in the past that we can rely on him being there. And diva players are rough, but basically when we're picking these sleepers, like we're trying to identify the diva player that has the biggest opportunity. In this week, I'm going to be giving that to... obviously, the Houston Outlaws diva player here, he is going to be sitting because they do have King's Row. That's what makes me a little bit nervous about this pick. However, I mean, going against Nevix, I don't have any problems with it. But, I think diva players are bound to get a little more points than maybe they normally would in the 4-0 stomps or in the very favorable matchups, just because the team's literally rushing forward and just gets to just kind of roll over people at times. So I'm expecting maybe a little more kills than we'd normally see from him just because of the weakness in the Shanghai matchup here for Houston. Obviously, Seoul is going to not be necessarily great, but I just think on talent alone, we're talking about a different class of diva than Nevix as I continue to taunt Asmith into making the bet.
Do they play King's Row versus Shanghai?
They play King's Row versus Shanghai and Seoul.
then yes, I will take it. I will
All
take
right.
your bet.
So we've got
It
our
is
Lord bet in
decided.
play. I will write them down in the notes. And let's see. We can move on and talk about supports, although that's me first. So I've got to stop typing, at least for the time being. I won this bet with Boombox as obviously the #1 support player. So he's not pickable, and I don't think, I mean, his point total was so high, I doubt he qualifies from that perspective either. But I'm going to be taking Zebasai here. As the Florida Mayhem kind of rebound, the flex support player has a lot more room to breathe and live and not die immediately. When the DPS are getting some kills and able to punish people as they try to dive on him. So I'm looking at a player like Zebasai, and I'm trying to find his point totals here as they've kind of increased recently. So it starts really bad, right? In week 7, 43 points, but then he like doubles that to 95 last week, and now he's up to 150 this week. And I'm not necessarily predicting another big jump here, but 150 points is a pretty solid performance on the overall from the support spot. So I'm going to pick him and hope that he can maybe continue to improve a little bit. And, we've talked about how their matchups are okay. I mean, they've got a real chance against San Francisco to get the win. And I do think Florida has an opportunity to at least play Seoul close. I mean, it's hard not to think that when you see Florida play so much better and then Seoul struggle against London. I'm not calling a win. I'm still calling, like, I'll probably be picking this as a coward's 3-0 for Seoul. But I just think it should at least be close enough that the players won't be brutalized for the matchup. Blevins, you're up next here. So who do you got?
Yeah, well, I want to preface this with, at first I wanted Zebo. I saw that you took him. I'm like, okay, well, that means that Zupe's got to be open. Well, Zupe is actually in the top 15 because I wanted a Florida Mayhem player here. But nonetheless, I'm going with Nuss. Now, this is one of my patented shoot the moon type of picks here. I had a huge week last week or this week, whatever you want to call it. 207, had a 136, but sometimes he just doesn't play or he gets mixed playing time. So definitely going to be a risky pick here, but I think it's a feast or famine pick, and I want to go for the win. I don't want to go for second place here.
I like it. Asmith, you are loving to pick these new guys in here for the sleepers this week. So who do you got for support?
Look, this guy isn't even in the game right now. He ain't even in the game. We're not talking about practice. We're talking about the game. He ain't even in the game, and I'm picking him because I really do think that Winston Lab is going to add him because he's literally playing.
There's no reason not to.
Yeah, there's literally no reason not to other than you're just too lazy to do it. Please, Winston Lab, don't be too lazy to do it. All right. That said, I really
played
like
more than
Moth's...
IDDQD.
Yeah, exactly. He's getting close to playing more than XQC.
He's already got more maps than Spree.
You are correct. So, look, I really like how Moth has been playing. I think with Moth in the lineup, San Francisco has looked better. And so a better San Francisco overall means more points. I like his whole setup. So I'm just going to risk it all here and throw out Moth and just see what happens. I'm going to add up his points and we're going to post it in Twitter. I'm going to do it. I've already made the decision. So I'm going to do the math and do it just to see what it looks like. And then I might horribly regret this decision later, but who cares? YOLO.
When you're at the bottom, you can't get worse. So
that's exactly it.
I do feel confident I will be first for supports next week, though, on only the basis that I'm the only one with a Zen player here. So that should bode pretty well for me.
Zen entirely?
They could very well be doing some flipping for sure, but
I feel like they keep doing back and forth.
I feel like it's back and forth because Zupe has a significantly greater number of points.
That could very well be true. I know it's there. It's in both of their pools. We will have to wait and see. It's so hard to pay attention to their supports when like their DPS are finally shining. That's definitely getting the most of my attention. So could have been wrong there. But let's move on. We've got a couple of names here in the Douse the Flames section. Blevins, why don't you start off with whichever one of these two you'd like to douse the flames on this week?
Yeah, I'm going with Boombox here. He was the #1 overall support scorer with 281 points. He's the number 12 overall He's a number 12 overall support player on the season. He was number 1 this week.
Yeah, but Blevins,
or
he
number
had
11.
63 points last week. Why would you douse the flames on him? He's
Right,
up like 4 times the point total. Come on.
He's had one week where he was over 200 previous to this. And granted, he was pretty close, but it was stage 1 where he was getting more points. He's really not getting it this week. He had a really big week here. It's not going to happen again. Douse him.
Fair enough. A. Smith, anybody you'd like to douse the flames on this week?
I really, really want to douse the flames on Snillo. Everybody's like loving Snillo. They saw him. They're like, dude, Snillo's so good. You're right. Snillo is really good. They were also playing they were playing Shanghai Dragons and the Dallas Fuel, and playing currently the worst 2 teams in the league doesn't really help you out. It helps you look good, but it doesn't mean you're actually good. Okay, Blevins, we were talking about. Blevins might be able to play the Shanghai Dragons and look like a decent tracer. Okay, let's just.
I wouldn't say that, but
okay, yeah, you're right.
Not tracer at least.
Yeah, okay, DeathBlow could play tracer against the Shanghai Dragons and end up looking pretty decent. So
I think I might be positive in points that week. It's possible.
It's very possible. But they have Carpe, and they're playing more competitive games this week. They are playing the Gladiators and the Valiant. Those are 2 games that you would need your best players, and I think that's Carpe. And I think you're going to bench Snillo because you want to win.
Fair enough, but I'll say this. If you got points for having an infectious smile, I think Snillo would probably still be a viable starter. Something about him, man. He makes me want to smile whenever he's laughing and goofing around on the stage. It was great to see him back. Obviously, a big player back from 1, 2, 3 days, right? That's where he comes from.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so great to see him get on the stage, but I agree, not likely to continue because rumor has it Carpe is like one of the best DPS players in Overwatch League, so probably going to see him back. But moving along here, we do have some mailbag questions. Thank you, big thank you. We had a lot of questions come through today. Really, really appreciate it. Hope you guys continue to carry that over into next week. But the first couple of questions here, we got 2 of them from Bacon Boy. The first one here is, who are the mid to mid high tier supports? He's talking about supports who can get about 140 plus points every single week. And I've just been relying on the fact that one of you were going to look at this. So whoever has that information handy.
I will take it.
All right, A. Smith, away.
I'll give you a name that has been very shockingly, and it's probably very underowned in scoring system, and that's Zupe. Zupe has been averaging about 150, 160 in stage 2 so far, and that's very middling. He's good enough that he's going to get you some good average points. He's currently the number 13 overall support. That's a very good average there. I like Zupe as that position. And other than that, you're kind of looking at some Lucio players who really aren't going to get you that high. I wouldn't say Toby would either. So go ahead.
I've got you 2 players here who are interesting that they're both in the ballpark of 140 for this stage. The first one, I guess he's a little bit under, but Kellex is getting at least a $110 a week here in stage 2. He's had a 150 week. He's had a 104. Here's another one who I think, I didn't do the math, but the eyeball test says that it's an average of 140, maybe a little bit higher. Ryu Jae Hong. He's had an actual 140 week. He's had a 159, a 169 this week, but he had a 72 week.
He only played. Did he play one map? I think he only played one map.
It doesn't matter. He still had that. If you're looking, it's just interesting that Jae Hong is probably averaging about 140 for this stage. Just a brief look. There's really not a ton of people who it really kind of is feast or famine. You're either getting a ton of points.
Boombox is probably there in the average.
Right.
When you look at some players that are a little more consistent, I mean, Toby's been a little disappointing, but his point totals are pretty consistent. So if you're just like sick of not getting that 100-point baseline from your support players, he's certainly viable.
Oh, no. Toby, yeah.
you know, you've got players like Ark who fall a little short of that mark, but I think you can probably rely on them to be in that 120 range. 140 was kind of the magic number for making this very difficult to answer, because we tend to have players that are considerably above or considerably below that, to be perfectly honest with you. The last one I want to bring up is Unko. He's right in that wheelhouse as well. He had a huge performance in week 7, and he's generally been above that mark, though he does have like a 130 in the first week of the stage, things like that. But great question, kind of a very good baseline for, you know, where to put these guys. That 140 mark is really a very solid number for a good performance from a support.
That is the top of the mid, like slash bottom of the top here. I mean, the problem is that there's not a lot of like if you go any higher than that, there's like a little bit of a gap, and then you start hitting your top 5 people for average. So
yeah. Well, the next question from Bacon Boy here is, should I trade Muma for Soon? He also has Fissure on his lineup, so he's not completely bereft of tanks after making this trade, and it is on the new scoring system. I'll go last, because I do think we have different answers here, but I won't even go if the answers are just the same. Blevins, would you trade Muma for Soon?
Oh man, and the new scoring system, and you have Fissure. I mean, I guess maybe. I mean, let me take a look really quick at Muma. I mean, I haven't even looked at Soon scoring, but I gotta say probably not here. Muma is just a consistent. His lowest ever is 145. So his lowest week ever is better than the high mid for support. Now, granted,
Soon outscores Muma on the overall by like 55 points on the season so far. It is very close as far as the sheer points scored.
Yeah. It is definitely close. I mean, I guess yes, but it's like a minor upgrade at best.
Okay.
Asmith, what do you got?
I am going to say yes for sure. I like Soon's upside. And it doesn't matter if it's a tank or not, because it's not like you're going to be constrained to not having a good tank with Fissure. So you're just looking at overall, am I going to, you know, is Muma a starter? And he is a starter for you, for sure. And it's not that much of an upgrade, but in the new... in the stage 2 without a Mercy meta, Soon has looked better, and Mercy is not coming back in the meta. It does not look like it anyway.
It's not really left the meta either, but
it's left in the same capacity.
Yeah. It left as the must pick like Lucio was,
right.
And also the like getting a ton of reses point generator as well.
Exactly. So, and Soon has looked good regardless of whether his team is winning or not. And we have not seen Grim Reality, period. And now Muma didn't have a backup. Now that they got Fact Fiction and the way Houston likes to make subs sometimes, I could see Muma sitting out every once in a while.
See Muma on Tracer, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you never know,
try
man. So I'm just saying, like, you know, there's a possibility that Muma ends up sitting out every once in a while. I think he is the starting tank for Houston, and I think it would be crazy for them to sit him out. But I do know that they have this thing where they like to play all their players. Dude, screw playing time, man. You just want to play the best players all the time.
Yeah, listen, I do think there is that kind of one impending week where they'll want to see Fact Fiction play just to kind of get him used to the stage a little bit. And so if they do need him, it's not his first time out there. So there is that kind of landmine to look out for. But for a lot of the same reasons that you said you would make the trade, I wouldn't make the trade, because I do think Muma is lock and load regardless of the matchup, regardless of how the team does. He's going to produce. The question is, can we start to see him over 200 again soon? You know, he did get there this week, but I want to see it with consistency see. I mean, 194 the week before, close enough, 185. But it does make a difference, like not quite getting there versus getting there. So I do want to see Muma get back on track. I think with the help coming for Houston, I would hold on to Muma. Like we said, new scoring format means we don't really care that it's a DPS or a tank on the overall. Listen, look at your roster construction, right? Like if your DPS are brutally bad, then yeah, you can make this trade because you do have the tank there. But on the overall, there's DPS players coming in that are more likely to make an impact. I'm looking at you, Arhan. Like there's people I think you can go out there and pick up that will boost your DPS score, and I'm not sure we're going to see that happen with tank going forward. You know, Super's out there, and you can pick him up, and he might come in and start. And you probably should go out there and try to pick up Super at this point.
Already did.
Yeah, but it's just kind of one of those things. Where there's just positional scarcity is a problem in the tank department. There's just more DPS players I would feel better stockpiling tanks right now that I could rely on to score near as many points as soon than I would kind of spreading myself into DPS where everybody's probably got at least 2 guys they're pretty comfortable with starting on a week in and week out basis. But we'll have to wait and see. It is very, very close. Trust your gut there. Like our opinions are great and they can help inform your decision, but know very, very much so that this is your decision and it is so close that not one of the 3 of us would think you were crazy if you did it or didn't do it. It is a very, very well designed trade there. It's a very balanced deal. So whichever way you want to go, I think you'll be fine. Dr. Witz has a question here. Are Fleta and Munchkin worth playing this week in the old scoring format? He has Bedosin, Fraggy, Mickey, and Rascal on the bench to potentially play over them. I know my answer here, but Blevins, why don't you start us off?
Yes, play both of them. Don't play any of the other players, especially like in the old scoring format. There's very few tanks or supports that you want to play over DPSs, and none of the ones that you have are those.
Yeah, not even close in my mind.
It's not even remotely close.
Asmith, anything to add? This is like an easy play the DPS players.
I forgot it was. I didn't look at the scoring system, but yeah, it's old scoring system. Don't do it.
It's not close.
Play your DPS
because of the scoring system. This is not even a conversation for any of the 3 of us. Got to play the 2 Dynasty DPS players. Yeah. Another question from Dr. Witz here: should I bench Dante for Unco? I don't care what scoring format is. I don't want to play Dante under any circumstances. Do either of you want a piece of Dante given Sinatra's coming back? Not coming back, but
if it's a new scoring system, you better start Unco today. They put up close to the same amount of points anyway in the new scoring system. They average pretty close to the same. Unco's a little lower, but I'd rather have that consistency rather than the uncertainty.
Yeah. I got nothing new to say. That's
old
all.
Scoring system
might be worth the risk because Unco's not going to do very much in the old scoring system for sure. Hard to argue with that point of it as well. But a question here from a shorter name: thoughts on Fleta for Gesture? So trading away Fleta to get Gesture at tank. This is a question that would be much better, more accurately answered with a feel for who your other tanks are, who your other DPS players are. But A-Smith, what would you do in this situation in a vacuum? Are you willing to trade Fleta to get Gesture?
I want Gesture. I want Gesture, period. I like Gesture. Gesture's the best tank, and Gesture's putting up amazing numbers, period. Gesture just overall is dominating. He hasn't been under 200 points since week 3.
Blevins, anything to add here?
No, I think it's the same conversation. It's a similar conversation with Muma. I think that the number one, I mean, it's actually even more it's even more in the favor of Gesture here. Muma soon is closer. Gesture number 1 tank overall. Fleta is slowly. Fleta is number 11, almost out of the. Like we can almost pick Fleta as a sleeper in a couple of weeks. So think about it like that. Like I don't even actually think it's close. Definitely make that trade, especially considering that the tanks are a little more. Your high scoring tanks are, I think, more valuable than your high scoring. They're at least in shorter quantity than high scoring DPS.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add here other than like it depends very much so for me what the rest of your team looks like. So, you know, if you've don't have solid DPS players in the back. Like Fleta, you can lock and load play every single week. So if now you're talking about like having to guess right about which DPS players are going to perform better afterwards, maybe it's not worth doing. But in a vacuum, assuming I've got adequate DPS to play instead of Fleta, and assuming, you're getting very probably the best tank on the overall here for fantasy. You can assume that, you're not going to be playing anybody else over him if you pick him up. So I'm assuming tank is a weakness and DPS you're a little stockpiled on. So assuming that's the case, by all means, go ahead and make this trade. But 2 more questions here. The second last one is from the Bellman. He wants to know, which player would it be most fun for you to grab a beer with? And Asmith, Lord Asmith, we are going to start with you because Blevins and me have the same answer.
Okay. I look, I know this player is not lead of a drink, so I think I'm gonna grab a juice box with your boy Super. I really like Super. He seems like a really fun, passionate guy. Seems kind of really down to earth and really fun. However, I do really, really like the other answer, and that was the first person that came to my mind. But I really, really do think grabbing a juice box with Super would be really fun.
Yeah, if the way he plays Reinhardt is any indication, I would 100% grab a juice box with Super. I just don't know enough about him personally to really vouch for that. But Blevins, there's one player in particular that meets the bare minimum beard requirements to go out and get a drink with you and me. So I'll let you talk about who that is.
It's obviously Fraggy. He's got the beard. He's got the personality. He's got the aggressive Reinhardt. What other player in Overwatch League just owns a type of character? Like whenever we're playing, if someone's going ham with Reinhardt, it's called Fraggy. We're calling it Fraggy. There's few other players that have that distinction. I guess there's a couple. Like anytime I get a kill with Zenyatta, it's a Jonak. But there's few other players that have that distinction as Fraggy. He's also got the high noon bump. Everything's going for Fraggy.
I could actually see him like wanting to get a beer with him. I'm just saying.
I know few people who turn down free beer.
Whenever we get out there to see a game, I think you can rely on me and Blevins trying to reach out to him and get him to meet up with us. But we will see if it actually happens.
When I go out there, I'm definitely going to be living in the Fusion in the Fusion treehouse.
I'm not, because Fraggy keeps you out of the bathroom. That's a nightmare.
What do you mean out of the bathroom? He's going to keep me out of outside. He's going to keep me out of the pool. I don't get it.
The pool? Oh, God, you're an animal. You are a filthy, disgusting animal, sir. Fraggy will not get a beer with you, but I get you wanting to get a beer with Fraggy. If you're peeing in his pool, he's definitely not going to drink with you.
Hey, if you're keeping me out of the bathroom, man, you got to do what you got to do.
But before we sign off before the episode, we do have one last question to be a little bit more serious with. Yes, from J-Man1954 Kappa on Twitch chat here. Thank you so much for viewing in. Guys, if you want to listen to the show live, we do record every Sunday evening about 6:30, 7 o'clock or so. It is a bit of a variable time. Join the Discord. We do announce it as we're going live, but in the same ballpark. His question here is, are the Gladiators DPS players playable with how they swap in and out? I'll answer this one first. For me, they're playable. You just, like, now that we have a baseline for what their point totals will be, like, their substitution strategy isn't really changing. They seem to be doing a pretty even rotation of these guys, and I don't think that's going to really change very much, and their performance isn't dictating that they should change it very, very much. So listen, you have a decent baseline for what their point totals will be or what you can expect from them. So as long as you're okay with what that baseline number is, it's better than your alternatives, yeah, by all means, you can use these guys. They've been consistent performers. Asher, I think, has a lot of upside going forward. He's just had some really, really standout performances. Hydration probably has the best Pharah in Overwatch League right now. He certainly has the best Doomfist in Overwatch League right now. Not that those two characters in themselves see a ton of playtime, but his Genji obviously is no slouch either. Listen, I think these guys are great. I'm trying to acquire them if I can for a decent price, and I don't have any problems playing with them. Just, what you're getting from them. They're going to miss a map or two, so keep it in mind and adjust for it and plan for it. Smith, Lord A. Smith, anything to add while I play your trumpets again?
I mean, I think you're putting up like 120 points, average for these guys a piece. They're pretty close to the same. Like they are the 19th, 20th, and 21st overall.
Yeah, they're all right next to each other.
Yeah, they're all
crazy.
next to each other. So they're averaging very close to the same. I actually, what are we looking at? Like hydration, yeah. Surefour is putting up the least points per map, so I think Surefour is the last one you want to own. I'd rather have hydration or Asher, but either way, I'm not completely on board with them. I mean, I think you're middling. The support players that we were talking about listing earlier are going to do better than these guys on a day in, day out average. So I would rather own somebody like Unko as opposed to Asher or Hydration, or somebody like Zupe over these guys. Now it depends. I mean, if you have nobody, yeah, go get them, but you need to know what you're putting out, and I don't think they're tier 1 starters. I think they're your last player in kind of option.
Yeah, bottom of the starting roster for sure. Blevins, anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, what I'll say is from personal experience, I've had Asher and Hydration on my old scoring system format team since the beginning, and obviously I've done decent in that, and I'm not just bringing that up for that reason, but I do think my strategy going into that was to favor tank. It was to get top tier tanks and top tier support. So I have Fate and Jonak on that team. So I filled out the rest of my my DPS line with these lower end but still consistent DPS players. I think I have Tavik on that team as well, who at the time was lower end. Now, granted, like if we ever see a meta where Doomfist comes in, like Hydration all of a sudden skyrockets in value, right? Because if depending on how much you see it played, he could be an absolutely amazing player. Asher is, like A. Smith said, oh yeah, I don't have to call him Lord A. Smith. Like A. Smith said, is at the top of these three, but I think all of them are decent. And again, like we've talked about from very early on in the show, it doesn't matter. Like you don't need to have the top scoring player every time on your team. You need to be able to build your team knowing how many points, or being able to know about how many points you're going to get for a team, for a player. So if your team has the ability to win with a slot that gets 120 points, yeah, pick up any one of these three, with favoring Asher first, then Hydration, then Surefour. But if you can live with 120 points from one of your slots, this is actually, like, they might be the perfect player to fit on your team, because they are not feast or famine players. They are exactly consistent. And that in and of itself could be more valuable than having the player that's going to get 300 some weeks and then isn't going to play in others.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I do in fantasy football. I don't build a team that can go out there and score 150 points every single week, because doing that is forcing you to take these high upside but low downside players that just completely blank themselves every now and then and just can't, don't do anything for your team. So I aim for teams that try to score like 95 points every week, and I really aim for those maybe older players that are consistent and I know what I can get from them, and then try to fill in a couple spots with maybe one or two boom bust players instead. And this is a perfect candidate here, where these players aren't going to be the reason you win, but they can certainly keep you from losing just by how consistent they are so far. But gentlemen, that brings us to the end of episode number 10. We've made it. Our first milestone, as meager as it is, we have gotten there. So congratulations to all of us on that. Big thanks to everybody in the live chat who hung out with us. Also, all of the downloaders and the listeners online. We really appreciate all of you. If you want to interact with the show, discord.me/high noon podcast brings you into the Discord. It's a lot of people came in today, so by all means, feel free to keep that train rolling, and we would love to answer any of your questions there. There's a fantasy mailbag channel that we monitor, and that's where we get all these questions we answer on the show. So by all means, join us there. You can also tweet at us at HNP_fowl play, FOWL play. If you have any questions, you can send them there as well. We're trying to use the Twitter a little bit more. And please do remember, guys, we are separating the show into its own podcast feed. So you'll want to go over there, subscribe, leave your review. And starting next week, this won't appear in the standard High Noon podcast flagship iTunes feed that we've been using for all 10 episodes so far. So make sure you find the new location before it's your only alternative. Anything to add here on our way out the door, gentlemen?
Yeah, two things. First is that, like we said, we do record live, twitch.tv/HighNoon podcast. I am not hosting this. That's DeathBlow that's doing this. So I'm keeping an eye on Twitch chat the whole time. I'm getting the last second questions in here. Our J-Man 1954 Kappa question came in during the recording. So guys, if you forget to type your question in on Discord, you can head over when we go live. We do announce it on Discord and Twitter and all that stuff. Come in, hang out in the chat. I'm talking in chat. I'm doing all that stuff because I don't have to I don't have to fly the ship. That's DeathBlow for this show. So I'm doing that. And the other thing is that this is the last one that's going to be on the regular podcast feed. Go on your iTunes or on your preferred podcast platform. Look for Foul Play. HMP look for Foul Play. If you can't find it, go to Discord. We'll get it to you. But if you ask next week, hey, where's the show? Why can't I see it? Why isn't the show up yet? I'm making fun of you live on the show. So just I'm putting that out there. If you ask, we've already told you the answer's right here. I'm going to say, hey, listen to the last episode, and I'm making fun of you for it. So just putting that out there. I'm doing it for all the shows, but you've been warned here on this show as well.
I'm personally going to be asking in Discord where I can find the new feed. But anyways, guys, that is...
Where can we find it?
Oh, no, I'm not going to make fun of you if you don't know where to find it, because that can be hard. But if you're like, hey, where did the feed go? Why isn't the show up yet? Like,
okay,
if you don't,
I'll make sure I word it in a way that will trigger you.
Yeah.
For Blevins, for Asmith, guys, thank you so much. We will see you all next week. As a reminder, next week there will be Overwatch League Stage 2 playoffs occurring on the day that we record this.
Playoffs?
So we will be recording after the playoffs conclude, and it is a recap only. There will be no need to look forward. So if you remember at the end of Stage 1 and the beginning of Stage 2, we were able to only look backwards and then only look forward for consecutive episodes. We will be following that template again. So look forward to it. It's always nice to dive a little deeper into the stats and maybe make fun of each other a little bit more than we normally would. So big thanks, everybody. We will see you all next week.
See you.
Got his boots and he put on his hat. He threw the coin away that same day. It's in his past and he's not looking back. He says, finding mine now, God's my way. He's not good, but he sure ain't bad. He'll make amends for the sins that he has. He says, I'll change the world.